touched her forehead. Her hair, masses and masses of it, was drawn back behind her head and wound up in a long plait, and her gown, as I felt sure a dress as wonderful as hers must be called, was made of a soft, dark, velvety material with shoulders gathered like the wings of angels. Boys, I had learned from somewhere, were supposed to think their mothers were beautiful, but I suspected mine was not. She looked older and thinner than most of the mothers at my school and worried about everything, especially me. Lately she had been very worried indeed. There were dark pouches under her eyes. The lines across her forehead and around her mouth seemed to be cutting deeper into the skin, and her hair, which used to be dark brown, had grey streaks running through it. I worried that I had worn her out by not being good enough. I was always meaning to be better, yet here I was, burgling her secret drawer. But I also knew that the anxious, haunted look could descend when I had done absolutely nothing wrong. Whereas the woman in the photograph was calm and beautiful and alive, more alive than anyone I had ever seen in a picture. I was still kneeling in front of the drawer, lost in the photograph, when I heard a hissing sound from the doorway. My mother stood rigid, fists clenched, nostrils flared. Tufts of hair stuck out from her head. The whites of her eyes seemed to be spilling out of their sockets. For a long, petrified instant she didn't move. Then she sprang, hitting and hitting and hitting me, screaming in time to the blows that fell wherever she could reach until I broke away and fled wailing down the hall. From old Mrs. Noonan, I learned that if you shivered for no reason, it meant that someone was walking over your grave. Mrs. Noonan was thin and stooped and had twisted, papery hands with strange bulges around the knuckles. She smelt of stale lavender and felt the cold even in summer, especially when she took her first sip of tea. My mother didn't like her saying it, so Mrs. Noonan took to shivering silently when she was drinking tea in our kitchen, but I knew what she meant. When I wasn't being bad, I used to imagine that someone had found out my mother's grave, a man in dark clothes with a dead white face who dodged behind a tombstone whenever he saw you coming, so that you could never catch him doing it. That was why her anxious look came down for no reason at all. Some days you could tell that he was tramping back and forth, over and over her grave. We would sometimes drive past Mawson Cemetery, but I'd never been inside because we had no relatives there to visit. My father's parents were buried in Sydney, and he had a married sister in New Zealand who wrote every Christmas, but they never came to see us. All my mother's relatives were buried in England, and that was where I imagined her grave must be. Mawson is an overgrown country town sprawled along the edge of the Great Southern Ocean. It used to be called Leichhardt, after some luckless explorer who never returned from the Dead Heart, until, so my father explained, the council decided to change it to something more cheerful. Beyond the remnants of the old town centre, there's nothing much to see except shopping malls and filling stations, a mile after mile of sprawling identical suburbs. Beaches to the south, hills to the north, the Dead Heart beyond. That was where you ended up if you crossed the narrow strip of farmland beyond the hills and kept driving north through the endless sandy scrub and salt pan into the desert. In summer, when the north wind blew, clouds of fine red dust covered the town. Even inside you could feel the grittiness of it between your teeth. My mother's stories of growing up in the English countryside were full of things we didn't have in Mawson: chaffinches and mayflies and foxgloves and hawthorn, coopers and farriers, and old Mr. Bartholomew, who delivered fresh milk and eggs to their house with his horse and cart. When she wasn't away at boarding school, she lived with her grandmother, Viola, and a cook and a maid, in a house called Staplefield, which had staircases and attics and more rooms than you could count, and she had a best friend called Rosalind who was allowed to come and stay for the summer holidays. My mother could describe their favourite walks so vividly you felt you were there, provided you didn't interrupt. There was one I especially liked to hear about, which led across fields full of friendly cows to something called a wicket gate, up through an oak forest where if you moved very quietly you might easily see a hare or a badger, and out into a clearing where they would find, somehow it came as a complete surprise every time, a pavilion, which my mother once drew for me. It was like a smaller version of the bandstand in our memorial park, but freshly